Let's bring in some royalty. Your host of the Royal Report, Caroline Di Russo, joins us from Perth, and Radio Royalty at 2CC in Canberra, Stephen Senatiempo. Thanks both for joining us again.
G'day, Chris.
Aren't we all glad that we're not in Victoria tonight? All this talk about Daniel Andrews' Socialist Republic, and after years of lockdowns and spending and getting re-elected, Caroline, now comes the bill. Tax increases, payroll tax, land tax, and all this nonsense that it's only going to last 10 years. I say when you increase the tax and say it's going to be taken off in 10 years, it's as good as permanent.
It is as good as permanent, and the only thing that's missing is, partridge in a pear tree and a kitchen sink, but everything else is pretty much there, Chris. Look, it's actually it's unsurprising to anyone who knows how to use a calculator and understand that when you borrow stuff, the money has to go back. There has been the most extraordinary waste in Victoria, and while Daniel Andrews has tried to blame the pandemic, tried to blame war, tried to blame the Reserve Bank, ultimately a very small percentage of that debt is even remotely COVID related, and there's nothing here that helps people in relation to cost of living issues. So even fees and charges have gone up something like 25%. Well, that there is going to hit the average Victorian right in their hip pocket. And you're absolutely right, that very temporary levy, which just tries to make it not look like a tax, I think that there's going to be staying for a good long while.
Look, we feel for Victorians who are going to be hit by this, but it's going to hurt the whole country. It's the second biggest state economy in the country, but Victoria now has more debt than Tasmania, New South Wales and Queensland put together. And these sorts of taxes are likely to slow that economy and hurt it over time. Let's have a listen to the Treasurer, Tim Pallas.
We're through the existential threat that was the pandemic event itself. So it is now, as debt, a dead weight on the state going forward. We need to pay that debt off.
Yeah, no shortage of hyperbole there, Stephen. The pandemic was an existential threat, apparently, to Victoria. But this is predictable, and it goes to show that no matter what politicians say about spending and debt, in the end, taxpayers have to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we ban the word existential? Seriously, because most politicians know what it means anyway, and
the word existential is now under existential threat.
Oh, goodness me. But this COVID levy is just ridiculous. I mean, the reality is that every expert tells us that one of the biggest drivers of the inflationary problem we've got at the moment is a lack of productivity. So what we do is make businesses cop it in the neck with this COVID levy, which is going to affect productivity even further and send us even further into a spiral. It's just, you wonder... I guess we've got to take responsibility for this because we get the government we deserve in a democracy. And if the people of Victoria think that this bloke is the best option, well, then clearly they've got bigger problems than they thought. But anybody who thought this COVID pandemic was behind us is seriously kidding themselves, because we've got to be honest about this. The pandemic wasn't the problem. We're not suffering from the pandemic. We're suffering from the response to the pandemic that our collective governments have continued on with and continue to use as an excuse. And you just wonder when it's going to end. 10 years, good luck with that.
Yeah, spot on. There's no doubt about it. And look, we're in relatively good economic times comparatively, yet there's a hell of a cost of living squeeze on. There's a housing crisis. I'll show you some reports here, Caroline, of people asleep, the working homeless, they're being called, in the suburbs of Sydney. Some of these people are pictured in Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's very electorate. The people who don't have anywhere to live. This is confronting stuff for a country with 3.5% unemployment and still a pretty good economic situation.
It absolutely is. And the thing is that West Australia is actually the rough sleeping capital of Australia. And we've got a government that has banked $17 billion in surpluses, I think, over the last 3 years. And we have got less social housing than what we had when they came into government in 2017. We have got an absolute crisis in construction, which Mark McGowan tries to blame on things being too good, which is one of the most awkward responses I'd seen. And then even more awkward response today that, we've got less social housing because we had to get rid of, group social housing so that we could get rid of the drug dealers or something ridiculous like that today. We've got 34,000 on our social housing waiting list and 9,000 on the emergency list. And the fact of the matter is, as we have this squeeze on cost of living, things like rents and even things like groceries and all those things are going up. Unfortunately, people who are working and people who are working full-time cannot make ends meet, and that is unacceptable in
Shocking,
a place like Australia.
A lot of people sleeping in cars as well. Now, homelessness is a very complex problem too. It's not just about economics, it's not just about dollars. It's often to do with family dysfunction, obviously mental health issues and the like. Stephen, I know you're involved in the Vinnie's annual CEO's sleep out that always raised a lot of money for Vinnie's to help this. I hope they're not doing it in Canberra. That'll be the coldest CEO sleep out in the country.
No. We certainly are sleeping at the National Museum, but I mean the homeless problem here in Canberra I think is an absolute disgrace because we're the most affluent city in the country. We've got the highest cost of living and it's really a two-tier economy here where you've got the rich public servants who are doing quite fine, but then you've got this other group of people in Canberra who are really struggling, and we've got a government that has ripped millions out of the public housing infrastructure. We've got less public housing dwellings now than we had when this government came to power. We've got about 3,000 people on the emergency waiting list. It's extraordinary that in a city in cities like Melbourne and Sydney, homelessness, as you say, is a complex problem that is going to be very difficult to fix 100%. Here in Canberra, it's a disgrace that's been brought on deliberately by a government that pretends to be progressive but just keeps leaving behind. And then, it gets left up to CEOs to sleep out.
Yeah, quick couple of things I want to rip through before we run out of time. One is Vinnie's CEO Sleep Out. That's on the 22nd of June this year. And if people want to donate, they can go to the website, ceosleepout.org.au. So get behind that. Vinnie's do a fantastic job. Now, one issue for you, Stephen. Pauline Hanson is looking to raise money for her legal action that she's facing against Maureen Faruqi. And to raise the money, she's been knitting jumpers. How much would you stump up for a hand-knit jumper from Pauline Hanson?
Well, I spoke to her today and I forgot to ask her if she can make one in my size. But look, I've tasted her homemade date loaf, and if she's half as good at knitting as she is at baking, they'll be sensational.
Well, I've not eaten any of her food, but I did drink some of her gin once that someone bought somewhere along the way, so I can recommend that. And now, while we've got royalty here, Caroline, I've got to get your thoughts on this latest story when it comes to royal gossip. So many people bagging Harry over the last few years. Now William's copped a serve. They reckon he's got a bit of a temper behind the scenes.
Newsflash, the royals are human beings. Look, this doesn't particularly surprise me. As someone who themselves is prone to the occasional tantrum, and I think a lot of us are, this doesn't surprise me. They do very well. They do very well in public.
What's he got to lose his temper about?
Guess what? His marriage isn't perfect. Guess what? Him and his wife have a fight occasionally.
Oh, come on. I don't believe it.
Apparently he's stubborn.
I don't believe it.
Stephen sitting there, he's Napolitano, he's stubborn in his sleep.
Tested the shekel. I just don't think that William's ever, forgotten to put out the rubbish bin or didn't unpack the dishwasher or forgot to, I don't think he has those sort of daily hassles. So I think he'd be pretty level, pretty easy there, I reckon, in the palace.